I was in grade 12 and I was playing on the basketball team, and we had a good team in my grade 12 year, but this one particular practice, we were goofing off. I mean, we were supposed to be warming up and getting ready for practice, but we were joking around, half-heartedly doing layups, and all of a sudden the coach came out of his office and he began to lay into us. He started yelling, "We're 2 weeks away from the provincial championships, and you guys are acting like this? I can't believe it. I mean, get your act together. Come on, guys. You're better than this. This is not how a good basketball team practices." And then I remember he took his keys out of his pocket and literally threw them across the gym, and they smashed against the door on the other side of the gym. I mean, we all stood there shocked. He didn't say a word after that. He just walked into his office. We didn't say a word after that. The gym was quiet, and all you could hear was the squeaking of the basketball shoes on the gym floor and the basketballs bouncing. Have you ever had a shocking or jarring moment like that? I mean, a moment that kind of rattled you a little bit? A moment similar to that caught your attention? Well, today we're going to talk about a shocking and jarring moment that a first century church experienced. However, what they were shocked about was not regarding something as unimportant as playing basketball. No. This first century church, they received a jarring letter about, get this, about what following God actually looks like. Or better yet, what following God doesn't look like. I mean, have you ever thought about that before? Have you ever thought about what following God really means? I mean, how do you know if you are actually following God? Are there signs? Or how about this? Is it possible to think that you are following God, but in reality, you're not? Well, those are the questions that we're going to be answering today. Now, this first century church was in a city called Corinth. It was located in modern-day Greece. And a man named Paul, who started this church, he wrote a few letters to them. They wrote back and forth in order to guide this church and guide them back on the course of their faith. And this church in Corinth, they were in some ways the problem child of churches for Paul. He wrote this letter to correct their wrong thinking and rebuke their wrongdoing. Now, Corinth was a city much like Vancouver. It was a place of commerce, a port city where lots of goods came and went. Now, people went to Corinth to be successful, and as a result, the city attracted an unusual amount of resourceful, talented, intense, and ambitious types of people. Now, the church in Corinth reflected the type of person who would live in Corinth. Unfortunately, there was lots of competing and lots of arguing within the church as well. And so I picture Paul having a moment much like my basketball coach did. He saw all that was going on within the church. He saw how talented they were. He saw how gifted they were. But then he also saw how dysfunctional they were. Then he had a throwing the keys type of moment. As Paul is writing this section of the letter, I can picture him saying to himself, this is not how a healthy church functions. This is not what following God truly looks like. And Paul writes this section of his letter, chapters 12, 13, and 14, and he's navigating a critical issue with some members of this church. He's addressing the gifts of the Spirit, which we learned about last week. And if you missed that message, please check it out on YouTube. And as we learned last week, some people were abusing these spiritual gifts. They were arguing as to which was the better gift. And they were using their gifts to show off. And so as gifted as this congregation was, they were equally dysfunctional. I mean, have you ever met someone like that? Have you ever met someone who was gifted yet equally dysfunctional? I mean, I used to coach a lot of high school sports teams over the years, and I've met a lot of gifted athletes. And sometimes you coach a team, and the best player on your team has the best attitude. They're the first at practice and last to leave. They're cheering on their teammates, encouraging them. They are a team player. I mean, that is a dream player. But other times, your best player has the worst attitude. They only play hard when they want to play hard. They don't make practice a priority. They're constantly rubbing their teammates the wrong way. I mean, they are the type of person that you want to kick off your team, but you can't because they're your best athlete. I mean, those types of people are incredibly draining. They take so much time and energy and patience. They drive you nuts as a coach. Now, this church was kind of like that star athlete who drives a coach nuts. This church was incredibly gifted, but equally as dysfunctional, and it would have been maddening for Paul. So, Paul had this dilemma on his hands. What do you say to a church that's doing a lot for God, but with the wrong motives? I mean, how do you pastor this type of person? What do you say in order to get their attention? Well, that is what we're going to focus upon today. Paul writes this chapter of his letter addressing this dysfunction, and the words that he used would have shocked his original listeners. The passage that we're going to be focusing on today is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and it's known as the love chapter. I mean, you may have heard of it. Even if you don't regularly attend church, you may recognize some of the content of this part of the letter. In fact, it may have even have been read at your wedding. It's sandwiched between chapters 12 and 14, both of which are focused on properly understanding and using spiritual gifts. So Paul wrote this chapter, chapter 13, to a dysfunctional group of gifted Christ followers. And in this chapter, he sought to answer this question: what does following God really look like? And Paul begins answering this question in the last verse of chapter 12, where he says, I will show you the most excellent way. In other words, Paul is saying, this is what following God really looks like. This is how you should be living and acting and using your gifts. Let me show you a better way. And he writes, if I speak in tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. What does Paul mean by speaking in the tongues of men and angels? I mean, that's an odd sentence. Well, speaking in tongues is a supernatural gift that God can give you. It's a supernatural gift where one can pray in a different language unknown to the speaker. Now, we're going to be doing a deep dive into speaking in tongues next week. But what Paul is saying is this: God can give you a supernatural gift to speak in a language that you do not know, but if you don't use it for others, it's just noise. It's useless. Paul is saying it is love that is the melody that harmonizes our actions and our words, giving them purpose and significance. Without love, this gift is useless. In fact, it can be harmful. But he goes on. He says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. Paul is saying, you could have the gift of prophecy, meaning you may receive marvelous revelations from God or be given great wisdom to understand the great mysteries of God. But if you do not have love, you are nothing. What does that mean? Well, we'll get into that in a moment. What Paul is doing here, he's building on his argument that without love, our actions don't mean much. Without love, they become a mere exercise in self-promotion and empty displays of power. He goes on in verse 3. He says, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardships that I may boast, but do not have love, again, I gain nothing. Paul is saying you can sacrificially give of your time, talents, and treasures, even your very life. But if you do not have love, you gain nothing. Wow. I mean, what exactly is Paul saying here? Well, let me put this in very practical terms for you. Here's what it means to you and I. It means you and I, we could be attending Broadway church. We can be serving on our worship team or kids ministry team or even at City Reach. You could be financially giving a lot of money to the church every single month. You could be going on mission trips and taking advantage of every outreach opportunity. But if you don't have love, you gain nothing. You see, Paul's getting to the heart of what following God really looks like. He's saying you could have supernatural and spiritual gifts. You can have the faith that can move mountains. You can sacrifice your time, talents, and treasures. But if you don't have love, you may not really be following God. That's a shocking and jarring statement. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, did I just hear that correctly? I mean, Lewis, did you just say I can do great things for God and it's possible that I don't even truly follow God? I mean, how is that even possible? Did I hear that correctly? Well, yes, you did. Paul is saying you can use spiritual gifts, have great faith, even be generous, and still not give your heart to God, or at least not fully give your heart to God. In other words, here's the problem. You can be a Christ follower on the surface, but not at the core. You might be thinking, well, how? How is that possible? Give me an example here. Sure. Let's look for a moment at Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 to 23. Now, Jesus here is teaching on true and false disciples. He's unpacking the difference between those who truly follow him and those who pretend to follow him. And look at what Jesus says. It's pretty shocking. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" You see, according to Jesus, it's possible to use spiritual gifts and still not be a Christ follower. Some of these false disciples that Jesus was speaking about, they prophesied, they drove out demons, they even performed miracles, but they did not truly follow God. And Jesus said, "I will say to you, I never knew you." Now, this is exactly what Paul is trying to get at this part of the letter. He's saying, listen, people of Corinth, do not be fooled. Following God is not defined by being gifted. True Christian character is not defined by the gifts that you use. So, don't mistake talent for character. You can be doing lots for God, but not allowing God to transform you. Has that happened in your life? Are you hiding behind the gifts that you have? Are you hiding behind the talents that you have? Are you hiding behind the compliments others give you? Don't mistake talent for character. Following God is not defined by being gifted. Now, to be honest with you, this is a huge challenge for pastors. I mean, I can fall into the trap of reading my Bible, not for myself, but to prepare for a sermon. I can fall into the trap of doing things for God because it's my job rather than being with God. Pete Scazzaro, a pastor in the United States, he learned this lesson the hard way. He was the pastor of a growing congregation. He was preaching every Sunday, leading a growing staff, and people were coming to Christ under his leadership. Many great things were happening at his church, but his personal life was a different story. No, he wasn't involved in a sexual scandal. He didn't steal money from the offering plate, but he was believing the lie that what he was doing for God reflected a good walk with God. He thought because he was doing so much good work for God, that meant in his mind that he was truly following God, but that was not the case. The reality was that although many great things were happening under his leadership and at his church, a different story was actually playing out under his roof at home. As he explained, Pete says, I was using God to run from God. What a powerful statement. You see, he wasn't allowing God to transform the deep places in his life. He was stuck at an immature level of spiritual and emotional development. He was mistaking talent for character. Now, admittedly, Pete Scazzaro, he's a pastor, but this is not only a problem that pastors deal with. This is something that could be true for everyone. So, how did things change in his life? Well, it was actually something that his wife said to him. She saw this disparity between his church life and his home life, and finally she addressed it. She said, Pete, I'm getting off this roller coaster ride. I love you, but I refuse to live this way anymore. I have waited, I've tried talking to you, and you aren't listening. I can't change you. And she says, oh yes, by the way, the church that you pastor, I quit. Your leadership isn't worth following. Wow. I mean, Pete was an incredibly gifted and talented person, but something was wrong in his spiritual walk with God. You see, following God is not defined by being gifted. And Pastor Scazzaro, he learned this lesson the hard way. And now he spends much of his time training pastors and Christ followers to follow God the right way. You see, following God is not defined by being gifted. It's also not defined by being good. What does that mean? Well, here's the challenge. Don't mistake charity for Christianity. Don't mistake charity for Christianity. How can that happen? Well, let me give you an example that I heard another pastor share one time. Picture this. You're married to your spouse and he or she becomes ill and can't function the way they used to. They can't get out of bed much. They can't go for walks around Stanley Park anymore. Their looks begin to deteriorate a bit. And all because of that, you get a divorce. And your justification is, well, listen, I didn't sign up for this. Well, what happened here in this relationship? You see, you were loving your spouse for you. It was a selfish love. As long as there was health and beauty, your love was there. But when those things went away, so did your love. You see, you sacrificed for that person. You shared your money and your wealth and your life. You were good to that person. But then you unloved him or her when it wasn't that convenient. You see, all your being good to that person was not for that person, it was for you. You see, you and I, we can fall into the same trap with God. All our being good is not for God. When you get down to the heart of the matter, you're doing it for you. You're doing this good because it feels good, or because others are doing it, or because it's convenient for you. You've mistaken charity for Christianity. The question you need to ask yourself is this: what is my motivation in all these good things that I do? Because the reality is, you can do all these good things, but that in itself is not what following God really means. You can do good things for God, but still have layers in your life that are untouched by God. You can do good for God, but still have layers in your life that are untouched by God. So then, following God is not defined by being good or being gifted. So if that's the case, what is it defined as? Well, Paul goes on to give the answer. In the first 3 verses of chapter 13, you may have noticed that Paul highlights one important factor. He says, you can speak in tongues, you can prophesy, you can have faith, you can do all these good things, but if you do not have what? Love, it doesn't matter. That means that following God is defined by being guided by love. What do I mean by that? What does it mean to be guided by love? Well, when Paul is speaking about love in this passage, he's using the ancient Greek word agape, which is actually a word that we've unpacked here at Broadway Church many times in the past. The word agape doesn't describe an emotion at all. Agape isn't based on affection or approval. It is totally unconditional. It's coming as a free gift, not because the beloved deserves it, but because the lover chooses to give it. It's a decision of the will to act in the other person's best interest, whether we feel like it or not. It's getting down at the supper table and washing your disciples' feet like Jesus did. It's being willing to lay down your life to save people who don't even care about you, like Jesus did. It's the way God unconditionally loves you and I, and the way God calls us to act towards others as well. You see, the Christian life, it's not defined as being gifted or being good. No. To truly follow God is to live a life that is guided by this unconditional love. It's to live a life that is motivated by this sacrificial love. It's to live a life that is driven by love that is not deserved. So what does this love even look like? Well, Paul gets into some specifics starting in verse 4. He says, this agape love is patient. Agape love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Agape love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Now here, Paul, he gives us a list, and although it's not an exhaustive list, but he gives us a list of the characteristics of love. Now, here's where we can mess things up. In fact, here's where I have messed things up before. If you're like me, you see this list and you try to figure out a way to be more of those things. My instinct is to put all these things that I'm weak at on my to-do list. I think, okay, I need to be more kind. So that means I need to compliment more people. I need to not be easily angered. So my goal is to bite my tongue more. I can't be proud. So, okay, that means I need to read a book on humility. I mean, if you're like me, you feel like your to-do list just increased. But that's not how this type of love is attained. Here's the key. This love is not a possession of some kind. It's not something that could be achieved by doing more. I mean, this list is too difficult to accomplish. The qualities are too grand. Paul is trying to pastor his readers here. He's bringing them along like a good shepherd tends to his flock. He's saying, listen, some of you guys are abusing some spiritual gifts. Your motivations are wrong, and I want to show you a better way. You can have great gifts, you can do great deeds, you can have great faith, but without love, you're nothing. It doesn't matter. He's saying you need this agape love. However, this agape love, it isn't something you could achieve. Get this. It's actually someone you need to accept. What Paul is doing here is he's pointing his readers to a person. He's pointing his readers to Jesus. Do you want to be guided by agape love? Follow Jesus. Do you want more of these characteristics in your life? Follow Jesus. Why? Because Jesus embodies all these qualities of love. He embodies patience, humility, forgiveness, perseverance. And in order to produce more of these characteristics in your life, you don't need to do more or give more or be more talented. No. You need to experience Jesus. You need to experience His unconditional love, His undeserved mercy. To truly experience Jesus is to allow Him to soften your heart and allow Him to transform every part of your life. And He will produce these qualities in your life. The reality is that you can claim to follow God. You could even do incredible things for God, but still have layers in your life that are untouched by God. I mean, that is what some members of this church in ancient Corinth were guilty of. So let me ask you, are you guilty of that? I mean, do you have areas in your life that are left untouched by God? Let me challenge you. Stop trying to do things for God and begin to fully follow Jesus. And He will bring about this character change if you follow Him with a soft heart. He will bring about this transformation because it's through Jesus that this love and these characteristics will overflow from your life. So, what does following God really look like? What is the better way Paul's talking about? Well, don't try to do good or be good. No. Here it is. Let God's agape love be your motivation and your foundation in life, and let everything else flow from there. And therein lies today's life hack, our practical solution to an everyday problem. Here it is. It's only when you truly experience Jesus that you can truly express love. It's only when you truly experience Jesus that you can truly express love. Do you want to have God's love expressed in your life? Remember this. This love is not something you could achieve. Rather, it's someone you need to accept. So the challenge is this. You need to wholeheartedly follow Jesus. Experience His love for you, then your life will overflow with it. A few weeks ago, we were talking in our staff meeting, and an interesting question came up. Here was the question. What would you tell your younger self? I found Pastor Darren's answer actually very interesting. He said, what I would tell my younger self is this. If you are pretending, you're not really living. If you're pretending, you're not really living. Have you truly experienced God's love? Has it truly transformed your life, or are you pretending? Because if you're pretending, you're not really living for God. These Christ followers 2,000 years ago, they were desperate to express God's love, but there was one problem. Many had not truly experienced His love first. They were pretending. And as a result, their motives were off, their mindset was selfish, and many were pretending to be Christ-centered followers. But it's only when you truly experience love that you can truly express it. And so my challenge to you is to search yourself today. Are you pretending? Are you holding back areas in your life so that God cannot impact them? I mean, are you doing things for God, maybe even great things for God, without being truly transformed by God? I mean, maybe you've given Him 90% of your life, but what's the 10% that you're holding back? Don't fall into the trap that many in ancient Corinth did. Allow God's love to be your motivation and to spark your transformation into the person that God wants you to be. Because it's only when you truly experience Jesus that you can truly express love. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you're here today and you haven't truly experienced Jesus. Maybe you want to invite him into your life for the first time. Or maybe as you watch today, if you were to be honest with yourself, you would say, listen, I've given him a percentage of my life, but there's 30 or 20 or even 10% that I'm holding back. If that's you, I want to lead you in a prayer today. And it's a prayer to simply say, God, I want to wholeheartedly give my life to you. Begin to transform me from the inside out. So if that's you, just agree with me as I pray. God, I come to you broken, and I come to you as someone who needs you. God, I want to give my full life to you. I want to follow you. I want to be transformed by Jesus. I invite you into my life. I want to give you my whole life. Transform me from the inside out, beginning today. If there's areas in my life that I'm holding back, show me what those are. Give me the strength just to give everything to you today. And may your love be my motivation. May it spark the transformation in my life today. I pray this in your name. Amen. Well, if you said that prayer with me, the best advice that I can give you is to text the number on the screen right now. We have a pastor on the other end, and we want to help you in this incredible decision that you made. Thank you for joining us today at Broadway Church.